A couple weeks ago, Anthem, the long-awaited BioWare looter shooter, was released to less than stellar reviews and opinions from the general gaming audience. Most people I've seen have called it tedious, disjointed, and overall just disappointing. Now, for the sake of informing the audience of this video, I have not yet played the full release of Anthem. I played the open beta a few weeks ago, and was not entirely convinced during that time of the game's potential, not enough to make me forget the chance of it being vapid and repetitive as I had experienced previously with Destiny 1 Vanilla. So out of fear, I had steered clear of Anthem on release. I have, however, been keeping a close eye on the game, as for a time I was very interested in purchasing it, but after seeing the backlash and all the issues and problems it has, I've decided to stay away from it, at least for now. This negative attention towards Anthem is something not too dissimilar to the reaction that we've seen for another very popular but similarly underwhelming game that released fairly recently, that game being Fallout 76. Other than the obvious differences, like Fallout 76 being a buggy mess, I think there's definitely a case you could argue that both games failed for very similar reasons. Both of these games, in my opinion, have fallen into a pit of different trends that many games are falling into at the moment in the gaming industry. In this video, I'll be going over some of the biggest trends that games are tending to go towards at the moment, and the problems that stem from said trends. Starting with the biggest trend in gaming currently, I'll be talking about the live service model. You've probably heard about the live service model, or games as a service as it's commonly known, but if you haven't heard of it, it's officially described as providing video games or game content on a continuing revenue model. These games released under the games as a service model typically receive a long or indefinite stream of monetized new content over time to encourage players to continue paying to support the game. Now, in general, when this service is pulled off well, it can lead to some fantastic games that last for an extremely long amount of time, which means that if you have paid for one of these games, you find yourself getting more than enough bang for your buck as such. Or if the game is free to play with purchasable content, you feel like purchasing anything is going to be going towards a genuinely good product, and therefore your experience with the game will be a positive one. However, that's normally a best case scenario. Commonly at the moment in the industry, this model is not being replicated very well in my opinion. It normally leads to another big issue at the moment, which are undercooked game releases, something that has never been more prevalent up until now. Most games launching as a live service seem to be extremely hollow, and once you've burnt through the few hours of gameplay that is there, you're left with a complete lack of things to do. Taking Anthem's issues in this department for example, the endgame currently is barren, and as typical for a looter shooter, all you're asked to do at the moment is basically just go back and do harder versions of things you've already done for better loot. The lack of some proper exclusive endgame content in Anthem, and any game like this at launch, is all due to how the game development of a games as a service plays out. To be clear again, I'm not a game developer, so this is just my research and knowledge of the process, and I'm sure every developer and publisher does things slightly differently behind the scenes and whatnot. But the issue is, they all come out the same in the quote-unquote final product, so it doesn't really matter about the intricacies of development when everything always ends up having the same issues. As far as I'm aware, development of a games as a service is not dissimilar in theory to how games would cut content for paid DLC. Instead here, a game will be gutted so that the content can be trickled out over the course of maybe 1 to 2 years, possibly longer or shorter depending on the game, which in the end leaves us with a full product, maybe a full product plus a little more. What this does is give the illusion of a game supporting their customers and players for a long period of time, when actually, we're just getting the other half of the game that we never got on release. Now, it's hard to know when a game is cutting content as such for a later date, and not just because of development time, balancing issues or bugs and so on. So realistically, no one but the developers and publishers are going to specifically know what's being held back, if anything at all. Therefore, I need to give an example of what I'm talking about, just so I don't come across as talking a load of unsubstantiated rubbish. Taking Anthem again as an example, before launch the game had a live stream where they showed off a variety of customization aspects for the javelins in the game, which are the suits your character wears, which gives you your abilities and so on. The problem is, as pointed out by many people including Angry Joe in his review follow-up video, some of this customization seems to have been held back, such as helmets and materials and so on, to be released at a later date. To reiterate, content can be held back for a variety of reasons, but it seems in the games as a service model, it's almost integral for the lifeblood of these games to make sure there's content to trickle out. So from a business perspective, if there's things a game doesn't necessarily need to have in at launch, it makes a lot of sense to update the game with this content later on, again, to give the impression of supporting the game. Although clearly, sometimes needed content is cut, like in the case of Destiny 1. A positive is that these content updates that are rolled out over time are usually free instead of paid nowadays. However, my argument to someone claiming this makes the issues at play here all better is that it's only the other half of the game we never got at launch, so why the hell shouldn't it be free? Shouldn't we be getting what we're paying for anyways? I shouldn't have to be grateful for getting what I paid for at release. If anything, I should be mad it's taken the time after release to get to that full product that I originally paid for. Not to mention, all of these free updates apparently somehow have to be subsidised by even more money through microtransactions that are seemingly in every game at the moment, but that's another issue in the AAA space all by itself. This all plays well into Anthem's post-launch release schedule also, as we can see that it's taken until May to get its first proper bit of content, with the other bits being tiny, insignificant things that don't make the game any more enjoyable to play or return to. So why should I be excited that, theoretically, I paid £60 plus for a game that isn't even getting proper post-launch support / things that should have been in the game already till 3 months later? Like mentioned earlier, you can see these issues in many other games releasing in this format. Fallout 76, Destiny and The Division, to name a few, all having similar issues, some worse than others I admit, but still similar issues nonetheless. Looking back to games a couple of years ago before this trend started to rear its head, you can see how these issues are prevalent, plain as day. Games would usually release as full packages, satisfying consumers and then being expanded upon in paid DLC. This is exactly what should still be happening in the game releases today. Instead, we're seeing half-baked, minimum viable product type games, using the games as a service model to hide that they are essentially just trying to create money-making machines, rather than completed and solid video game experiences. In turn, this is actually ending up backfiring for most of the companies being greedy anyways, as seen with previous releases of this type. There's only a handful of games, in my opinion, which are genuinely pulling off this service, and those games are very, very few and far between. I think the lesson that people need to learn here is that not every game should be a games as a service, and the ones that are need to be a lot better than what is releasing at the moment. Now, you're probably wondering, why is this video called Chasing Trends when all he's done is speak about live services? Well, that's because in my opinion, games as a service is the biggest and worst trend in gaming at the moment, and something that devs and publishers need to move away from. Of course, I want to make it apparent that in general, the idea of mimicking successful ideas or styles of games and so on in this industry is not inherently a bad thing. Neither is it a new thing. Evolution and innovation is impossible without an already established idea or system and whatnot, and trend chasing has led to many great games. Take recently the surge of the Battle Royale genre as an example for the benefits and negatives of chasing trends. There are countless BR games out there at the moment, but the ones that are successful are the ones that have taken the formula and built upon it in fun and interesting ways. Fortnite added the building mechanic and introduced the first free-to-play model in the BR game space. Apex Legends recently introduced class-based gameplay and better team play initiatives with the ping system, and one of the first big BR games, PUBG, brought the formula to the masses of the gaming audience, despite not being the first BR game out there, due to it being a fairly well-developed game. In some way, all of these games made innovations on a popular formula, which is why they've been successful. This highlights though why chasing trends in this industry can sometimes be a bad thing that I don't think a lot of companies seem to realise. If you're not bringing anything distinct to your game that people can get elsewhere in a more popular game, no one is going to be interested, whether it be on release for the purchase or after the purchase once they've realised your game is not going to hold their attention. This plays well into why so many games are failing. Companies aren't seeing there isn't one specific game mode or genre that makes a game successful. It's the content in the game. It's plain as day and such a simple thing, but all these businessmen at the top levels of these big game companies can't see through the surface information of these successful and profitable products, and then follow these paint-by-numbers designs, expecting as much success as the popular games in the genres that they're poorly imitating. Companies will sometimes poorly imitate at the cost of their own reputation. We're seeing many devs and publishers tarnishing their reputations and brand names at the moment, just to try and make fat loads of money, in turn forgetting that these are games that people enjoy and come to for specific experiences. If they're not enjoying what is being produced, then no one's going to pay you money. I mean, whose smart idea was it to turn a single player RPG franchise into a semi-MMO-esque multiplayer game with no dialogue, minute RPG elements, and removing all the NPCs, and then trickling out content for this game over the following months despite it being a broken mess? I'm talking about Fallout 76, and how in one game Bethesda managed to neglect its core audience in the Fallout franchise to follow the games as a service and multiplayer only trends, in turn catering to virtually nobody once the duped Fallout fans had got bored of it. Games are starting to follow these cookie cutter formulas in order to reach mass market appeal, to sell as many copies as humanly possible and make boatloads of money. Whether it be game modes like Battle Royale, making looter shooter type games, turning games into a live service, or adding loot boxes and scummy money making tactics. It's even news now when a game isn't including something like a Battle Royale mode. A few years ago, if you remember, there was a massive push after GTA 5's success to turn every game into an open world game, but again, all of them missing the point that it was the content in the game that was enjoyable, not just the open world design. Ubisoft, for example, turned and are still turning literally all of their game series into open world games in some form, which I think has made them less appealing to play. This has led to a lack of contained linear story games and so on, which is why we see such a demand for games like God of War. I think devs are put off of making these types of games sometimes, as the success seen in these trending games is a draw, not only for money, but just the satisfaction of seeing that your game has become successful. But I think that unless you bring something truly new to the table when you're doing this, you're not going to be seeing that success. Bringing this all back to Anthem, I think this idea of trying to appeal to everyone has not been a good thing for this game in particular. EA has taken BioWare, a predominantly single-player RPG game creator, and by my own speculation, forced upon it this quota of having to make a game that can earn them big bucks, therefore needing to pull in as many people as possible. We saw it happen with Dead Space in EA's own turf, forcing a horror game dev to turn the game into a co-op action shooter with Dead Space 3, and previously mentioned Bethesda doing a similar thing with Fallout 76. All of these companies essentially chasing trends and not thinking about what they do well in this industry. Anthem hasn't done enough to justify BioWare pivoting from their normal game experiences. I always think trying something new is the best way to show creativity in this industry, but instead of being something new, BioWare and EA have just followed a path that many other games have followed recently. I'm still very hopeful for Anthem's future, and as seen by another large games as a service game, Rainbow Six Siege, a game can really be turned around after some good updates. My hope is that this will happen with Anthem, and that EA won't pull the plug on it or BioWare anytime soon. I think if I'd want one thing taken away from this video, it's that not everything needs to follow trends to be successful. If anything, it's much better for companies to set their own trends, as most games are just being made for the lowest common denominator to drive as many sales as possible, but in turn just appealing to nobody on the grand scale of things. In an industry where every game requires a time sink and a handful of money, why would anyone want to continue playing the same type of game over and over again? People want a variety of experiences, and if you can't necessarily offer a newish experience in something that's already established, I think it's a disservice to your own brand to turn something people love, whether it be a company or a game series, into something generalised just for the sake of a few people coming to try your product out.